Forum. Glad to see you all. Great to be with you this morning. I just want to put this on your radar. I do this every time I'm up here, I feel like, but there's always new people with us, which I love that God keeps bringing people to our church. If you've been new with us the last couple weeks, couple months, maybe new today, there's a Connect card right in front of you on the seat back. I'd love to connect with you after today, throughout the upcoming weeks. You can turn that into the black boxes on the back wall of the auditorium or hand them in at the information starting point desk across from the car feed bar. We are glad you've been with us if you are new, whether that's today or in these last few weeks or month. And so let's go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 2, as Bradley alluded to. I'm so thankful that we have elders who prayerfully work through bylaws. That's not a one-meeting project, as you can probably imagine. So just thankful for their support and thankful for their inclusion of us to review that as a church body and work through that together. That's super helpful and always the right way to do that. Matthew 2, we're going to talk about a paranoid king, the killing of babies, and midnight escapes. Probably exactly what you thought we would be talking about post-Christmas. You're like, you really shouldn't have. And I would say, you're welcome. This is often sometimes the forgotten Christmas story. I think we will realize and recognize the beginning pieces of Matthew 2. You see the Magi, the wise men traveling. You see them bringing their 3 gifts. See them going on their way. We don't talk a lot about the back half of Matthew 2, but we will be covering all of it today. So let's dig in. No more preface needed. Let's begin in verses 1 through 3. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. So, thinking of King Herod, we're going to flesh out who this guy is. Really, a lot of today will revolve around this kind of case study of King Herod in Matthew chapter 2. But we see, first of all, his disturbed paranoia. That when King Herod was deeply disturbed, all of Jerusalem was. Really not just with this one instance, for sure this one, which highlights the magnitude of what we're going to talk about, but for a lot of ways and a lot of different reasons, King Herod was a very paranoid guy. More on that in just a second. Thinking of when one person gets triggered and has a deeply disturbed reaction, whether that was probably more than a look on his face, but everyone knew, word started to spread quickly, Herod is not happy. And all of Jerusalem is like walking on eggshells around King Herod all the time. And so the rest of Jerusalem was put on notice. There's a time, whether I was engaged to my wife or recently married, it was over a decade ago, she had suckered me into going to Kohl's at midnight for Black Friday shopping. How many of you, show of hands, that just sounds magical to you? There was no one that raised their hand in the first service, so it's crazy. I'll report these statistics to my wife with a survey after today and show her what everyone says. So we're in line. There's like 150 people ahead of us on the sidewalk. They're letting about 20 people in at a time. And this group of 4 or 5 party, they just avoid the line. They just go straight to the entrance of the door. They're just going to fork their way into the front of the line. And I'm looking around everyone trying to get a pulse of, is anyone going to say anything, do anything? What's going to happen here? And no one says anything. So naturally, I take it upon myself to be like, whoa, 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 what's going on over here? And point them, man, deer in headlights, they just freeze instantly. And everyone erupts in the line. They're like, yeah, get to the back of the line. It just took one person to put them on notice, and everyone else joins into the party. If that can happen at Kohl's in St. Louis on Black Friday, how much more so King Herod, you see where I'm going? Being paranoid, putting other people on notice. All right, let's actually get into the text here. Matthew brings us into the time historically, the reign of King Herod in verse 1. Herod the Great. There are several Herods in the Herodian dynasty. This is Herod the Great, as he's commonly referred to. And these wise men come from eastern lands. It's like saying they came from Timbuktu. It's like we don't even know where. It's just some faraway place. They have traveled far and wide in search of this newborn king of the Jews, the star, which they probably had when Babylonian exilement happened, they probably got some Hebrew scriptures and saw this in Numbers 24:17, this star that would appear and sign that a new ruler has arisen. And so they're putting all this together. They come and start in the capital city of Jerusalem, and they go to King Herod. Where is the newborn king of the Jews so that we can worship him? These are all triggering words to any Jewish audience who Matthew is writing to. They would have not needed any background information to understand what is happening here. But I want to give us some historical background because we might not know all the things to know, at least in summary, of who King Herod is and was. He was the Roman appointed king of the Jews for quite a few decades, a strong military leader, a brilliant politician. He gets the nickname the Great, namely for his engineering projects. You'll love this slide. Gave us some comparable equivalent net worth to Mark Zuckerberg today. Here's 4 of his major either renovations or construction projects. The Jerusalem temple by far being the one that's most well known. We estimate $1 to $5 billion project. This guy was a marvel in all kinds of ways of building and engineering. But he was also an unusually cruel tyrant. And we'll read more on that later in the text of Matthew 2. Some historical background to point out why is Herod so deeply disturbed when these guys are looking for some baby born in a town that's not even in Jerusalem? Well, he has already killed at this point in Matthew 2 of his predecessors to the throne before him with large numbers of their supporters. All the remaining Hasmonean family that ruled before the Herodian dynasty. He killed his brother-in-law, his mother-in-law, 2 of his wives, 3 of his sons, and the list literally goes on and on and on. You look at Herod the wrong way, what's going to happen? See you later. And so this brings us into what's happening here is he has all the money in the world. He's got all the achievements you could do, building after building after building, thing after thing, yet somehow we find him in our text deeply disturbed in it not being enough for him. The Magi and the wise men, they have no clue what they have done by saying these triggering words, the newborn king of the Jews, so that we can worship him. This set Herod off instantly, but he holds it together at least and is trying to remain diplomatic throughout all of this. But the question, to even put this maybe in a very clear, pointed, one-sentence word of who Herod was, consider Caesar Augustus, who's not the most moral man in human history. He said of Herod the Great, it's safer to be Herod's swine than his son. Play on words there in their language there, swine and son, similar words. That even the lead chief and emperor of the government of Rome is saying, hey, when it comes to Herod the Great, he's pretending to be, a practicing Jew, so he's not going to eat pork or touch a pig, but he'll slit the throat of his own son. And this just really highlights just how wicked and dark of a person Herod was in Matthew 2, this king of the Jews, literally speaking of who we're reading about in Matthew 2. I think a question that comes to surface that I've been wrestling with and chewing on is, what is the thing that puts everyone around me on notice? Now, you probably shouldn't answer that for yourself. I think start with yourself first, but probably entrust that question to people that know you best throughout this week. A spouse, a best friend, a parent, maybe a neighbor. Our neighbors know us pretty well, right? The good, bad, and the ugly. What is the thing that puts everyone around me on notice? We're going to see a lot of things in Herod that are deeply disturbing in the text today, and the temptation will be to say, thank God I'm not like King Herod. But what I want us to do is pull out these principles that we see in Herod's behavior and kind of frame them in just inviting questions as to say, God, would you search me? Is there maybe something? Maybe you might read this question and think, oh, there's nothing. There's nothing that I do that I become a different person when this thing happens. But there might be people that are closest to you in your life that could answer that maybe quickly than you would care to admit, or that I would care to admit. So good question to take with us. Consider that Herod has all the things in the world that you would want: power, prestige, politics, 20 to 50 billion dollars, just insane amounts of money, all the things, yet a newborn child has him deeply disturbed. Let's keep reading verses 4 through 12. See Herod's disturbed paranoia we just read about, now this plot that thickens. Verses 4 through 12. Herod called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem, search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." That's bleeding with sarcasm, if you didn't know that. Verse 9, after this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So verse 4, Herod calls this meeting, and he's the only person that gets all the pieces of the puzzle together, the when and the where. He's actually the chief priests and the scribes. They know the where. The Magi, they know when the star appeared, the chronology of all this. And so Herod's putting all of this together in a unique way, trying to figure out, where is this baby so that I can go exterminate him. Again, King Herod, just this guy that he's got not really even a nice list, but just only a naughty list. Reading about Herod in this text really reminded me of what happened and came out in a car ride going to school at the beginning of December with one of my girls. She was like, "Here's what I'm going to do for the month of December. I'm going to make a list of everyone in my class. And for the people that do something mean to me, I'm going to take them off the list. They're not going to get a gift from me on the last day of school before Christmas." I was like, that sounds like the way of Jesus for sure. I was like, well, maybe I should do the same for you and your sister. She's like, I don't know about that. Yeah, sounds a little strict there, a little harsh. And so I was very surprised that she's working on this charcoal list for her room of second grade children that are just trying to exist at school. They're not going to get a Christmas gift from the newborn Santa Claus, my daughter. Much more than my daughter taking notes of who was mean to her one time, you didn't even have to do anything to Herod to get on his charcoal list, right? It was almost like if it was just a feeling he had where he was threatened by you, boom, gone, exterminated, killed. Crazy to think. Here are 3 different responses in the text in relation to the responses to Jesus' birth. Herod's for sure is hatred, right? That's super clear and obvious. This will really get hammered out in verse 16, where he's going to wipe out a whole bunch of babies that are 2 and under in Bethlehem and the surrounding towns to make sure that he casts a wide enough net that surely Jesus is somewhere in there and he gets wiped out. And this is still the response to Jesus' incarnation in the world today, and Jesus coming to live 33 years, fully God, fully man, dying, rising from the dead. People's response to this large majority is hatred, disgust for that. But what's interesting in the verses to come is with the chief priests and the scribes, the teachers of the religious laws, the NLT translates it in verse 4. They have all the information in the world about the Messiah, where he was to be born, all the prophecies. They have probably almost all of the Old Testament memorized, if not all of it. So they didn't even need to Google, hey, what's the prophecy, right? They just probably already have that in their memory bank. When Herod asks the question, sets up the meeting, hey, where is this newborn king of the Jews supposed to be born? They're like, oh, Micah 5:2. And Herod's like, got it. And it's just a passing of intel and information. It doesn't lead to an inquiry personally. It doesn't lead to a search. It doesn't lead them to joining with the Magi, the wise men, going from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. It's not very far, like 5 to 7 miles from Jerusalem, so it wouldn't have been terribly out of their way to go see, wow, this royal entourage, which that's worth noting, right? We get 3 wise men because of the 3 gifts, as you probably heard. There's no way they would have traveled hundreds, if not 1,000 plus miles without a huge traveling caravan. So this is a scene, this is a show. We were talking after the first service, think of like when Aladdin comes in, to the Sultan's palace, like with the whole thing. It was like, it deeply disturbed Herod for understandable reasons. But the chief priests and the scribes, they're just indifferent. And man, this is a real caution for us today as followers of Jesus, that there is a real temptation that Satan threads day to day with us, is that we are following Jesus by just absorbing information. And that's it. You're good to go. Just know the stuff and just keep living your own life. Unchanged, unformed into the image of Jesus. The Magi, they don't just have the information, they're doing something with it. Which leads me to their response, which is joy. You see this in verse 10. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They've been on this journey for who knows how many months probably, just to come this one day, this one interaction with this newborn king of the Jews in this town in Bethlehem. They don't even know necessarily where they're going. Now they're at the place, at the house, bringing their gifts, not just material, but of time and energy and emotion, laying it down at the feet of the child Jesus. This is really the 3 responses that Jesus continues to have throughout the ages. Is hatred, people who are blasé, indifferent, couldn't care one way or the other, and then people that are just over the moon, excited and joyful. So this is a really important question for us to think through this week, is God's word mostly lately just been information for me to consume? Or has it led me to participate in what it is actually saying? Consider this, the worship. It says in verse 11, they bowed down and they worshiped him. And like I just previously said, it's not just gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which we got on the back of our hand of what they brought to Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus. But it's actually, they also have this gift of worship, which was this active journey, round trip, call it 2,000 plus miles. That they gave the gift of time. Verse 12, they gave the gift of changing direction. Once they encounter Jesus, he's going to maybe point you down a different street, a different way of life. There are all these things. And so you might consider this, that what is the best thing that I can give to Jesus is maybe time. We don't just say this during Christmas. We say this literally all the time. I'm talking to myself first, so hear that, because this might sting a little bit. But we say this all the time to everybody, almost in every conversation. How you been doing? Oh, I just been, what? Busy, right? Oh, doing good. I've just been really busy. I was at this conference a month or 2 ago during what Gray, he said, busy is a good acronym for being under Satan's yoke. I think this is where Satan has us convinced that, like, Let's run the play. Let's do a religious activity. Let's consume some information, and we'll just run that play the rest of our life. And he has us convinced if we do that, that's all we need to do in response to our worship of King Jesus. And that is a lie from hell, is it not? We need to be busy with the right things. Busy can be good. I mean, we're all going to be busy in some kind of way. What are you being busied with is maybe the important question here. A great question to consider going into this new year. What has had me busy lately? What do I want to keep running that play, or do I want to be busy with something different heading into this new year? Let's keep reading verses 13 through 18 in the text. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother, the angel said. Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. That night Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother. They stayed there until Herod's death. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet Hosea. I called my son out of Egypt. Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers. He deployed the guard to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. Herod's brutal action fulfilled what God had spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A cry was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted, for they are dead. The paranoia turns into a plot, turns into a practice. Eventually, this manifests itself tangibly, where Herod is not at peace, even at news of a new baby being born, thinking, oh, that baby, man, he's coming for my throne. Got to make up this plot. And then he actually acts on all those pieces of the puzzle that he put together from the wise men, from the scribes, and the priests, and he kills innumerable babies in Bethlehem and the surrounding area for simply just existing. Crazy. Come with me to verses 13 and 14, because I want to juxtapose Herod with Joseph, Jesus' earthly, adoptive father. It says, in a dream, the Lord appeared to him, go to Egypt and just stay there a while, because Herod's going to try to kill Jesus. And underline this phrase of verse 14, that night Joseph left for Egypt. It wasn't, hey, let's pray about it, let's talk about it, let's mull this over with family members. It was like, oh, sounds like he's on his way to kill Jesus right now. And think of this, it's not so much of like, if this happened to you tonight, like Jesus telling you, hey, go to Boonville from your house in Columbia. It's like, hey, go from your house in Columbia, Missouri to Canada or to Mexico, like some other country far away. This is not an easy task. Crazy to think that Joseph just does what God says. How simple is that? He didn't need all the details. Do you have a reservation for us at the hotel in Alexandria? No. Just get up and go. And that's exactly what he does. It reminds me of what we read in Hebrews 11:8 about Abraham. I love this. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. You ever felt like that before? Now, we feel like that just out of a state of confusion and just not knowing maybe where we're going. But in a spiritual sense, this is a great definition of faith. It's saying, I'm just going to wake up and pray, God, what do you want me to know today? What do you want me to do today? What a great way to pray every morning. What do you want me to know, God? What do you want me to do today, God? And just living in this open-handed state like Joseph of, oh, God, you want my soon-to-be wife to have a child before we get married? Sounds a little crazy. Okay. You want me to raise God as my son? Sounds a little crazy. Okay. You want me to go to this place, to go to a census and stay in Bethlehem for some time. Now you want me to go to Egypt? Now you want me to come back to now? There's just all these changes, right? And it just doesn't seem to affect Joseph in any negative way. Rather, you just read him getting up and going each time, immediately. What a great case study for us to consider in the person of Joseph. Now, come with me to verse 15. Hosea wrote, I called my son out of Egypt, referring to the exodus out of Egypt when God's people, the Hebrews, were liberated out of Egyptian bondage. So Matthew draws his Jewish audience back to, remember this great time. All throughout the Old Testament, God is saying, don't forget the God who brought you up out of the land of slavery. This was just a staple foundation story that everyone in the Jewish community was familiar with. And God draws us back. Hey, remember, I called my son Israel out of Egypt. I liberated you guys practically from literal physical slavery. Now he's saying Jesus being born is going to do that same thing, only in a spiritual sense. I've called my son Jesus out of Egypt to liberate the world from the bondage, not of physical Egyptian slavery, but of sin. There's a lot of overlap here with how Herod is the New Testament version of Pharaoh of Egypt. I won't get into that, but look at verse 16. We see that he becomes furious that the wise men had, quote, outwitted him. That word outwitted in the Greek is used about 10 other times or so in the New Testament, and almost every other time it's translated in the English, mocked. So think of all the things we've learned about King Herod today. You think this guy who's already deeply disturbed, no one even need to poke the bear for that to happen. And now the wise men don't come back as he instructed them to do. And that these guys would defy King Herod shows probably how powerful and how big their caravan was of whoever else they brought with them. Herod just loses his mind. It says that he was furious that he had been mocked by the wise men. And so he gives the hit, deploys the armed guard of Jerusalem that are under his authority. And instead of fighting invaders that might be a threat to the people of the Jews, he actually kills the Jews' babies instead with that same armed guard. It's hard to say how many babies died that day. Just this text hits different this time around for me. I've taught and preached through this before, but I now have a son who's going to be 2 at the end of January. And it's crazy to think that all he had to do was just exist and grow up for a year or two, and he'd just be slaughtered because some king is paranoid about a baby that's going to usurp his power and his prestige and his place on the throne. If you look at verses 17 and 18, we see another prophecy fulfilled in Jeremiah 31:15. Ramah is this town just outside of Jerusalem, I believe, where the sending place where the God's people were marched into Babylonian captivity from the city of Ramah. So think this is where all families were split up, and Jews were going in every direction, and Rachel is heard weeping with great mourning as she weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted. Now they're dead. So families are being split up in Jeremiah 31 and exiled to a totally different nation and culture and totally different way of life. But now, like, the families are not just being split up, but they're being killed and slaughtered. And so just adding to the pain of what's happening here. Now I want us to consider that we all get insecure about the immediate future. I think sad but true that we are like Herod in this way, right? I mean, think about Herod who, as you read Matthew 2, the paranoia is obvious. But think about what's underneath, what's at the root issue of his paranoia. What goes beyond that? Well, he's insecure, which he has no reason to be insecure. He has money and power and position and authority and building projects and a great resume, and like he's in control of all the things, yet he is so insecure, which I am theorizing comes from living in a state of disobedience to God. It says that the role of the Holy Spirit in John 14 through 16 is to convict the world of sin and righteousness and judgment. And that you don't have to be a believer and follower of Jesus to feel like you're not right with God. You know what I'm saying? Maybe you remember this before you gave your life to Jesus. That you feel this sting, this discontentedness. He's grasping at all the things that the world promises will fill you in life, yet he's still insecure and paranoid at this point in his life. Like King Solomon, he's tasted all the things under the sun, and it's still not enough. It all goes back to him, I think, not having peace because he's not right with God, because he's continually living in this state of disobedience. So you think how this pairs and juxtaposes and foils and contrasts with the character of Joseph in Matthew 2. Where instead of being paranoid, Joseph is at incredible peace. Almost any time you're reading about him in any part of the Gospels, Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, just always seems super chill. He's kind of like this just iconic dad from Bluey. Like just kind of exists and going around, just super at peace, chill. Didn't think I'd make that reference today, but there you go. You can see what's happening inside my house this Christmas. But it goes underneath that. How does he get this peace that is paranoia with Herod? Well, he's secure because he's been living in this fluid state of obedience, right? You want to talk about the forgotten character of the Christmas story, usually Joseph. This guy who had these plans to marry Mary, get married to her, have this family, and all that is, his reputation is, shade is casted on that with Mary being pregnant before the marriage, and then he's thinking about divorcing her, then he's like, okay, I'm in, and does all these things, and we just keep reading of these moments where Joseph just responds in obedience. And I'm here to remind us today that when we live in that kind of way and in that kind of state of perpetual fluid obedience with God, you will experience a peace that transcends all understanding in Jesus Christ that Paul writes about in Philippians 4:7. Joseph's circumstances didn't change, but his peace was perpetual. What a gift that is. Is there something you came in here today with, anxious about, something in the immediate future, like King Herod? You know, it might not be the same details, but man, often we can relate on this level that the immediate future often has us anxious and paranoid. But there's this peace that is available. So let's keep reading the text here and finish it off in verses 19 through 23. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. Get up, the angel said, take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child are dead. So Joseph got up and returned to the land of Israel with Jesus and his mother. But when he learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee. So the family went and lived in a town called Nazareth. This fulfilled what the prophets had said, he will be called a Nazarene. So this whole time, before this death proclamation of Herod, when you slowly are working your way through Matthew 2, this is what kept surfacing to my mind is like, man, when will Herod die? Like, when will he it seems like that's the only solution to the problem, right? It's like, when will evil cease to exist in the person of Herod? And you're kind of just hoping that verse 19 will eventually come. And then it does, and it says, then Herod died after some time. It's like, finally, right? Like this, we usually don't celebrate people's death this way, but man, when they are just the epitome of darkness and evil, it's like, yes, they're finally dead. And I just want to draw this out. This is just like the own way that God worked in the text with me. I'm not saying that this is perfectly exegetical or sound hermeneutics, but I just noticed these words in red and green, that Herod died and that Jesus returned. And I just, what came to my mind is like, man, here we have a good snapshot of the good news of the gospel is that it never promises that evil is not rampant in the world, but that God is present in an evil-infested world, and that he's doing something about it in the person and in the work of Jesus. That there is a day coming where all evil will die, where no more doctor's appointments are needed, where no more medication is to be had, where no more tears will be cried. Can you imagine this day? That seems to happen almost all the time. That Jesus is coming to return. He is already reigning. It just gives us a good purview. It points us really to the end of Matthew's gospel in Matthew 28, right? We're in chapter 2, but as we go 26 more chapters and we read about the story and the life of Jesus and the work of Jesus and him dying and atoning death on the cross and then rising from the dead bodily 3 days later and entrusting his disciples to live out the Great Commission and then ascend into heaven, we see that Matthew 2 is not the end of the story. It'd be pretty not great news if we were just left here with, oh, maybe Herod's son is going to kill Jesus. But it's not the end of the story. It's crazy to think that later on in Matthew 27, 20 through 25, those indifferent chief priests and scribes would go from being indifferent when Jesus was a 1-year-old to when he's a 33-year-old. They go to extreme hatred, just like Herod, and actually get Jesus nailed to the cross. They would say this in Matthew 27, "Put Jesus' blood on us and our children." That's how sick and repulsed they were at Jesus. So as we recap and as we come to a close, I just want to give you some questions to take into community this week. What's the thing that puts everyone around me on notice? Remember, ask this to yourself first, then ask someone you trust. Be honest with me. What's something I might not know about? Secondly, what is it about the immediate future that gives me anxiety today, right now? What has me stressed, insecure, anxious, fretful, all the things, all the emotions right now in life? And thirdly, where am I currently choosing to not participate in God's way? Where is God, maybe said a better way, inviting me in to not just have information about his word, but participation in his word? We got to learn from the indifference of the chief priests and the scribes in this text to not just let God's word just be another lesson, another sermon for us, but for it to lead to transformation, lead to joy as we soak and marinate in God's word and give him the incredible gift of time and abiding with Jesus. That out of that time spent in abiding with Jesus will always come an invitation from Jesus, come follow me. Now that you know the thing, let's go do the thing together. What a great invitation. I'll close with this picture. Have Eve displayed here with the fruit that she bit that was forbidden. Mary pregnant with Jesus. Eve downcast, shameful that she sinned. There was one rule given. You do what you want, where you want, how you want, when you want. And they did the one thing that God was like, oh, it's not good, don't do that. So naturally, like all of us, they do that one thing. And really, this is a good picture to really describe the story of the Bible, is that it starts off, you see the snake wrapped around Eve's foot. And there was this curse that was given to the serpent in Genesis 3. I will cause hostility between you and the woman and between your offspring, the serpent's, and hers. He, the offspring from Eve, all the way down through Mary in the person of Jesus, will strike your head, the serpent, but you will strike his heel. That Satan did indeed bite Jesus' heel, so to speak. That when Jesus dies on the cross, I think, I don't know this, I don't have supernatural eyesight to this, but Satan probably celebrating for like 3 days, right? Like, oh, looks like that didn't come to fruition. And then Jesus rose from the dead. And like I like to say, boom, gotcha. That the fatal blow to Jesus was actually Satan's fatal blow. That this is how God has been working in the middle from Genesis 3 to Matthew 2, everything in between here. There's been the Exodus. There has been exilement, as we read about in Jeremiah. There's been executions of babies. There's been all these horrific things happening in this little section in between here and here. And the hope that we get to hold on to, that Eve puts her hand on the womb of Jesus with Mary, is that while evil is rampant and remains unpredictable in this world, we as followers of Jesus get to have this peace, this reassurance, even in our sin and our guilt, as we join in with the evil time to time. And hate that we do that. We get to have this hope and this promise that comes, that even though that fear is rampant everywhere, it's not that so much that evil is absent, but that God is present, and we can trust and put our hope in that. Matthew 2, not the end of the story. So let us go out of this place like the Magi and like Joseph, going out with joy, giving Jesus the gift of a journey and time, being busy with the right things. And let us hold on to this hope that we don't need to fear evil, because even though evil is present, God is not absent. Will you pray with me? Lord, I thank you for our time together in your word. What I am trusting is that your word does not come back void or empty. Lord, I pray that it would penetrate like a sword through bone and marrow into our hearts and into our soul, that you would use today's word to shape us and conform us into the image of your Son, Jesus. Lord, I pray for everyone here listening that is maybe thinking, this does have me paranoid. This thing in my life is creating a lot of anxiety about the immediate future. Lord, I pray that you would point us to living in a perpetual state of fluid obedience, where we can, even if the circumstances don't change or however it shakes out, that we get to experience this supernatural peace. We thank you for that indescribable gift that is available through your Son, King Jesus. We celebrate him. Help us live in light of this truth as we go from this place. In Jesus' name, amen.